I am Vincent van Haaff. Waterland Design is my company. We specialize in acoustic design of production spaces primarily. And in this case, the design of acoustic design as well as some of the interior design of a restaurant. This restaurant is a jazz club, and therefore the integration of the seating areas, the actual guest areas with music performance had to be seamless so that the professional people who come to actually visit this restaurant would not feel that they are treated on a second-rate level. Acoustic design is the design of a space, an enclosed space with windows and doors that has a particular function, such as maybe a jazz club, or such as maybe a recording studio, or such as maybe a film post-production space. As an acoustician and also as a designer of production spaces, I have had the pleasure to have been involved with a lot of recording studio spaces, amongst which the old Charlie Chaplin stages here in Hollywood, where we did a complete rebuild and remodel over a period of years, known as A&M Studios. I have designed recording studios in Japan, in Australia, Conway Recording in Hollywood. I was involved with many private recording studios of people in their homes, as well as production spaces for specific artists such as Bryan Adams and Glenn Frey and Don Henley. And my first involvement was merely to help design the sound systems and the acoustic space, and that flowed out into consulting on the actual seating areas, the bar areas, the shape of the bar, for example, which became important as a part of the overall space in an acoustical realm as well. And once you start looking at an interior space as an acoustical instrument, it becomes necessary to look at every intricate facet of it, including the carpeted areas versus the areas that have wood floors, lighting situations even where lighting cannot interfere with the acoustical treatments. Acoustics is a science. It is actually a physics, an arm of physics that deals primarily with the distribution of air vibration and how air travels through a space. In the case of a performance space, it's very important that everyone in the space can hear what is going on in the area where the performer is sitting. It can be a pianist and a bassist and a trumpeter all at the same time, and all three of these instruments should be clearly intelligible so that not one drowns out the other. And for that, there are tools for that intelligibility that the acousticians use, and those tools are the actual mathematical prediction of a sound path, namely the place from where the sound comes to the place where you hear it, as well as a lot of intuition. There's actually some design involved, just similar to how a painter creates a painting. There is a certain art that is established in acoustics. In the very first stages of design, there is a floor plan, there are the drawings primarily that actually create an image of what is going to be built. Within that set of drawings are already a certain amount of circumstances laid out that create aspects of the design that become acoustically important. There are in a room, obviously, surfaces, wall surfaces and ceiling surfaces and floor surfaces that are all that have an effect, that are of influence on the final result as far as the sound goes. In addition to the drawings, then next step, there's the execution of the making of each one of the elements. There's materials that can be used with certain restrictions that are of good acoustical value, and there are materials that you try to stay away from that have unwanted acoustical properties, such as in a smaller space, such as in this restaurant, we chose to use a lot of wood paneling because it tends to be so that wood has a warmer, more natural feel when it reflects sound than, as you can imagine, for example, a steel plate, which gives a very an odd ringing sound when it reflects sound. There are always the effects of certain materials that we have to introduce because they are practical. There is in this space a very large stone surfaced bar, which we had to offset with a certain shape above it so that it would not give unwanted reflections and unwanted acoustical properties. So there are choices during the process of design that are influenced by the interior designers, that are influenced by the client themselves, the choice of and the taste of the clients, and the acoustician gets to oftentimes make a decision as to whether a material or a treatment is appropriate or whether it has actually the proper effect in the end. In this specific restaurant and jazz club, the first question that was posed was on the level of whether it would be possible to actually perform music purely acoustically for an audience of 120, 160 people, rather than having to have loudspeakers in every corner of the room, which you often find in a lot of performance spaces these days, even in concert halls, unfortunately. The request that was posed to me was, can we make this a purely acoustical performance space? And for that reason, there had to be, in specific places, you could say treatments, but you could also say band-aids, or you could say help elements that would create an acoustical environment that was very even, where music would be able to be played at a low level, an acoustical level, while the intelligibility was still high. And to be able to do that, we need to scatter the sound so that it reflects in all directions evenly. And very specifically, there is a staircase in this space that is a rectangular shaft, of which at least two of the walls, but also the ceiling and the floor, have surfaces that are hard and reflective and would have given an unnatural sounding reflection out of that particular space back into the performance space. I made a design of elements that would hang, that would treat the surfaces of the staircase, and a sculptor and I actually collaborated, and we got very large pieces of styrofoam and cut with a hot wire shape out of this styrofoam surface. And that was cast into plaster, and the plaster was actually hoisted, hung up on the walls of this space. And it creates, at the same time that it does acoustical benefit, that it has acoustical benefit to the overall space, it creates a certain visual, attractive, sculptural form that otherwise would have been rather technical looking. In architecture, I find, unfortunately, that the acoustical values that should be designed into any space have oftentimes been neglected. And I think it has to do with the fact that the actual teachings of architecture come from an era, from a time where sound was not as well defined as it is in our era, in our time. We have, over the last 100 years, 150 years, started to learn more and more about how sound behaves in spaces. And I think that scientists in the 19th century and even in the beginning of the 20th century didn't really want to touch that particular area specifically. The era before people even became interested in sound was concentrating primarily on the aesthetics and the visual aesthetics of a space rather than its behavior in the acoustical field. And that effect has carried over. I think if you're interested in acoustics, and wherever you go, listen. Listen to the space that you're in and try to find out as much as you can about why it is that a space sounds that way. There are actual reasons why the bathroom in your house sounds really nice when you sing in it. Why that is, I'm not going to explain right here, but find out for yourself. It is so that a muffler of a car sounds the way that it does. Find out why, and listen to the birds, listen to everything around you, and perceive sound, and that awareness will bring you further than all the mathematical studies and all the boring things that are behind it. Although you'll find probably that you will want to know the mathematics behind it sooner or later, because they will more explain what actually is going on in the real world. There are courses that are extensions of, as I said, the science of physics. I don't know, certain schools will have a freshman year of just physics teaching before a specialty in acoustics. In architecture schools, of course, the architects are always very interested and involved in the acoustical aspects of the spaces they design. So there are aspects of acoustics in architectural schools. The most important thing, I think, is the actual learning from the life around you and the everyday perception of sound, and eventually applying those perhaps through a schooling and taking that interest with you and developing it to the point where it is a hobby.